Welcome back to the Deep Dive. In our last deep dive, we followed Isaac de Beaus's perilous journey. I mean, a really harrowing escape from religious persecution in France, finally ending up, surviving on the wild banks of the Santee River in South Carolina.
A story of arrival, really. Survival.
Exactly. But that was about settling in. Today, we're asking something different. What happens after survival? This deep dive focuses on that next chapter. The first American de Beauce's Isaac's children, born right there in the New World.
And it's such a crucial question, isn't it? How does this family, refugees, really with a different language, different traditions, how do they actually integrate? How do they become part of the fabric of this English colony?
Right.
That's what we're exploring. How Isaac's children forged a new identity, transitioning from, let's say, French refugees to, Carolinians.
Okay, so our mission today, explore how these Carolina-born children managed that transition, forging an identity that was, you could argue, American even before America itself, the true founding generation of this specific family line.
Precisely. They went from being children of immigrants to established Carolinians. And the speed they did it in, that's what's so striking. To understand the choices they made later, we really have to look at the atmosphere they grew up in first.
Okay, let's start there then. Paint a picture for us. What was it like for this first generation born in Carolina, growing up in that French settlement near Jamestown? This is the early 1700s. It wasn't just a melting pot, was it? It sounds more like a distinct enclave.
Oh, absolutely. It was very much a world apart, almost like a little French bubble, nestled in the South Carolina wilderness.
Huh.
If you were one of Isaac's children, your daily life, your world, was shaped by the French language.
At home.
At home, yes. In the fields working. And crucially, at church. The Huguenot church was the absolute core of their community. Everything revolved around it, and it was all in French.
So their whole worldview filtered through that shared language, that shared history.
Yes. And it was a history steeped in, shared trauma. They were bound together by the stories they heard constantly. The dragonades, the king revoking the Edict of Nantes, their parents' dangerous escape.
Right. Isaac and Suzanne's story.
Exactly. Their identity was just so deeply rooted in that Huguenot faith, that heritage. They were taught perseverance, loyalty to the faith above everything. And this incredibly close-knit community, it gave them immense support, resilience, but it also set them up for friction, really, with the wider colony, which was very much English-dominated, aggressively so.
That strong internal bond provided strength, but they still had to deal with the outside English power structure. Okay, before we get into those tensions, let's just be clear on who we're talking about. Who were the Carolina-born kids who actually survived to adulthood?
Right, good point. The records show Isaac and Suzanne had 8 children who grew up and established their own families in the colony. That's quite a few for the time.
8. Wow.
6 sons. Isaac II, he's the one who kind of takes the lead. Then Daniel, Stephen, John, Peter, and Andrew.
Okay.
And 2 daughters. Elizabeth and another daughter whose first name, sadly, hasn't survived in the records we have.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
What do we know about the daughters then?
Well, we know the unnamed daughter. She married into the Gary family, pronounced Gary, yes. Another really prominent Huguenot family in the area, very important connection.
Okay.
These kinds of marriages within the community were vital early on, for stability, for keeping that French identity strong. Elizabeth, her early records are a bit harder to piece together, but she was definitely part of that initial enclave.
So you have this large family, 6 sons, 2 daughters. They're growing up speaking French, hearing these intense stories of persecution, worshiping as Calvinists. But just outside their immediate settlement, maybe a few miles away, everything, official government, law, business, it's all happening in English.
Exactly.
You call this living in 2 worlds. How did that actually play out for these kids? What was that like?
It must have been a huge balancing act. And the pressure was really on them, the second generation.
Not the parents.
Well, Isaac and Suzanne, they could mostly operate within the French community, right? They were focused on getting the farm established, survival.
Okay.
But the children, they were the future. They were the ones who had to engage with the wider world. Charlestown for trade, the colonial government for land, the courts, and neighbors who weren't French. All of that. Strictly English.
So if they wanted to do more than just survive, if they wanted to actually prosper.
They absolutely had to get good at English, no question.
Right.
Think about it. Their heart, their home, their faith, that was French. Spoken at home, prayed in French. but the world of opportunity, that was all English. When young Isaac II, or Daniel, needed to, say, file a deed for land or go sell their crops down in Charlestown, or even defend themselves if there was a property dispute,
Yeah.
they needed fluent English. And they needed to understand English common law, which was completely different from the French legal tradition they came from.
Wow, so literacy in both was key.
Essentially, yes. They became the family's diplomats, in a way, negotiating between those two worlds. And this bilingualism, this necessary skill, it was really the first huge step towards integrating.
That makes a lot of sense. You see that immigrant story over and over, don't you? The second generation bridges the language gap out of sheer necessity. But often that shift away from the old country language happens slowly over time. Was there something specific here, a catalyst maybe, that really sped things up for the DuBoses, pushed them towards English and assimilation faster?
Yes, there absolutely was. And this is probably the biggest turning point for them, culturally and politically.
Okay.
It wasn't about language itself or just culture, it was politics and religion. In 1706, the South Carolina Assembly passed this really critical piece of legislation. It's known as the Church Act.
The Church Act, right? Well, I think you mentioned this before. This is the one that set up the the Church of England as the official state-sponsored church for the whole colony.
That's the one.
Sure.
Correct. It formally divided South Carolina into 10 parishes, and it made the Anglican vestry, the church council, basically the local governing authority in those areas. This was way more than just saying, we prefer this church. It fundamentally reorganized how the colony was run. It merged civil government with religious administration.
And the impact on the Huguenots. I mean, they were famous for being devout Calvinists.
Exactly.
The differences between their beliefs, strict Calvinism, decentralized church, and the Anglican system, which was hierarchical, state-controlled, those are big differences.
Huge.
This wasn't just like switching pews. It sounds like a major ideological challenge for them.
It created a massive dilemma, a real crisis of identity almost. Remember, the defining story of the DuBoses was their parents fleeing France rather than compromise their Calvinist faith.
Right, they suffered for it.
And now, here they are in this new land. And while the act technically included clauses protecting their right to worship freely, but it created these incredibly strong incentives, societal, political, civic incentives, that basically made staying completely outside the Anglican Church a really difficult position to maintain long term, especially if you wanted to get ahead.
Okay, what kind of incentives are we talking about? What would Isaac's sons, for example, actually lose if they stuck strictly to their Huguenot identity?
They'd lose access, full access to the colonial power structure. And as landowners, that was becoming increasingly important.
How so?
Well, if you weren't formally aligned with the established Anglican Church, you faced what they called civic disabilities. Meaning you couldn't hold most public offices. You couldn't be a justice of the peace, a position of local authority. You couldn't get a commission as an officer in the colonial militia, which was a huge deal for social status. And critically, your right to vote, or especially to be elected to the assembly, the body making the laws, that was either very complicated or just flat out denied.
Wow. So if young Isaac II wants to secure his family's future, make sure they have influence, protect their land, he's facing a choice.
A very tough choice.
The religion his parents risk everything for versus the political reality, the power structure of their new home.
Precisely. Stick purely to the French Huguenot identity and faith, and you risk being marginalized. Or join the local Anglican parish, conform outwardly at least, and that opens doors. Doors to easier land patents, political connections, higher social standing. For pragmatic men raising big families, trying to build something in this booming economy, the choice over a generation or maybe two, it became pretty clear.
They started integrating.
They began to integrate into the nearest Anglican parish. In their case, that was St. James Santee Parish.
And those Anglican services, the prayers, the sermons, the announcements, that was all in English.
Entirely in English. The Book of Common Prayer, the King James Bible, English.
So that must have just put the pedal to the metal on the language shift, right?
Yeah.
Accelerated the decline of French within the family?
Exponentially. Think about it. Sunday was no longer the day where French language and culture were reinforced at the center of their lives.
Right.
Now, Sunday became the day that English was formalized, institutionalized. The children of Isaac II and Daniel, they'd be learning the prayers, the catechism, the customs of the Church of England in English. This acceptance, this generational shift towards English as the language of formal public life, That signals a huge cultural transformation.
So it seems fair then to call Isaac's children Isaac II, Daniel, Stephen, all of them the bridge generation.
Absolutely.
They were bilingual themselves. They had to be, right? Mediating between their parents' world, the memory of France, and the reality of Carolina. But they were raising children who almost certainly, because of things like the Church Act and just daily life, would grow up speaking only English.
That really confirms their role, doesn't it? That transition point is where the family starts shedding that label of French settlers and really claims the identity of Carolinians.
A conscious choice, it sounds like.
It seems they prioritize the future stability, the success of their kids and grandkids over maybe preserving every aspect of their original culture, including the language.
Okay, so language and religion are shifting, but you just said that's only part of the story. Integration also meant economic expansion.
Yes. Crucial.
Let's pivot then. Geography and wealth. The original Dubose place was there on the Santee River. But to really climb the ladder in colonial society, they couldn't just stay put on that first plot of land, could they?
No, absolutely not.
When did they start moving beyond that initial settlement, expanding out?
It started happening pretty quickly, actually, as those 6 sons grew up, got married, started their own households.
Okay.
You have to understand, land was everything in colonial South Carolina. It was the engine of the economy, yes, but it was also the primary measure of wealth, of social status, of political power. Your right to vote was often tied to land ownership.
Right.
To be considered part of the elite, the gentry, you needed land, lots of it. So the sons, they needed their own significant tracts, not just a little piece of the original farm.
And the economy was booming then, based on cash crops.
Roaring, absolutely roaring, based on rice and, a bit later, indigo. Hugely profitable crops.
And why did rice and indigo specifically demand so much land? What was it about them?
Scale, mostly, and very specific requirements. Rice, especially, they called it Carolina gold for a reason. It made people incredibly wealthy. But growing it effectively required massive infrastructure. You needed low-lying, swampy land near rivers or tidal creeks, land that you could systematically flood and then drain.
Oh, wow.
That meant building dams, digging canals, installing these wooden trunks or gates to control the water flow. It took huge amounts of capital investment, and you needed large, contiguous tracts of the right kind of land to make it pay off.
So it wasn't just farming, it was large-scale hydraulic engineering almost.
Pretty much. And indigo, while different, also needed significant acreage for cultivation and then for the processing vats where the dye was extracted. You couldn't be a major player in rice or indigo with just a small family farm. You had to become a planter on a larger scale.
Okay, so they need land, capital, probably legal know-how to secure the titles. How did they actually get it? Where did this new land come from?
They used the common strategies of ambitious settlers at the time. One way was securing land grants directly from the colonial government, the proprietors, or later the crown.
Grants, like free land.
Sometimes based on the headright system, so much land per person brought into the colony, but you usually had to pay fees, survey costs, and annual quit rents to the government. It wasn't exactly free, but it was a way to acquire large tracts.
Okay.
The other way was simply purchasing land, buying it from earlier settlers who maybe got grants but couldn't develop them, or from speculators.
So do we have records? Can we see this expansion happening? Specific examples?
We absolutely do. And again, Isaac Dubose II, the eldest son, he's a great example.
Okay.
He clearly wasn't satisfied with just inheriting his share of the original Santee plot.
Yeah.
The land records show him actively securing grants from the government and also buying additional property.
And where was this new land? Still near the original settlement?
No, significantly, he moved inland, away from the initial, more coastal Huguenot concentration. He acquired land deeper into the territory that was then known as Craven County.
Craven County. Where was that, roughly? Give us a sense of the geography.
Okay, so the original Santee settlement was fairly close to the coast. Craven County was this huge administrative area covering much of the northern part of the colony at that time. It stretched inland, up towards the area around Winyah Bay, where Georgetown would eventually develop.
So moving into Craven County was a deliberate move then, not just finding available land.
It seems very strategic. It meant moving into areas that were less developed but had that valuable riverfront land, perfect for rice cultivation. And importantly, it meant moving away from the exclusively French community and into territory that was more mixed, more English-dominated.
So the move itself was a kind of integration.
A physical manifestation of it, yeah. Literally planting their roots deeper into the broader colonial landscape, not just the Huguenot enclave.
And his brothers. Did they do the same, or did Isaac II go off on his own?
No, they all understood the game. Daniel, Stephen, John, Peter, Andrew, the records show them all over time, acquiring their own lands, establishing their own plantations and farms throughout that broader region.
Spreading out.
Exactly. They became independent economic units. It diversified the family's holdings, spread their influence geographically. This kind of decentralized growth was really smart for long-term security and prosperity.
This seems like a really critical point we need to underline.
Yeah.
They're moving beyond being just farmers growing food for themselves.
Yes.
They're transitioning to the cash crop economy. They're becoming planters.
That transition changes everything. A subsistence farmer, their goal is survival, feeding the family. A planter, their goal is commercial profit. It requires managing land, labor, which increasingly meant enslaved labor capital, and markets on a much larger, more complex scale.
Right.
By acquiring this land, getting the patents, developing it for rice or indigo, the Carolina-born DeBoses weren't just farming. They were building wealth. They were securing their family's economic future and, crucially, elevating their social standing.
Moving up in the world.
Moving up from being seen as maybe land-poor refugees or children of refugees into the ranks of the respected colonial gentry, the planter class. That was the group that held the real power in colonial South Carolina.
Okay, so let's recap. They're speaking English now, largely. They've navigated the religious pressure, aligning with the Anglican Church, at least outwardly. They've acquired significant land, becoming planters. They're economically integrated.
Yes.
What about fitting in socially? Into the day-to-day running of the colony. How else did they show everyone they weren't those French people anymore, but full members of society?
Right, the final pieces of the puzzle. And we find that proof, really satisfyingly, in the official colonial records. Court records, government appointments, militia lists.
What do they show?
They show Isaac II, Daniel, the other brothers, regularly performing the civic duties that were expected of established, respected landowners in the colony.
Like what specifically?
Well, for example, they served on local juries.
Okay. Why is that significant?
Serving on a jury meant two things. One, the English authorities, the magistrates, trusted your judgment. Two, it showed you understood, or were expected to understand, the basics of English common law.
Ah, right. You mentioned that legal difference earlier.
Exactly. Being chosen for a jury was a sign of acceptance within that English legal framework. It confirmed they weren't outsiders anymore.
What else?
They also show up prominently in the colonial militia lists.
The militia, defending the colony.
Yes, and often not just as regular soldiers, but holding commissions, serving as officers, or in other leadership roles within their local militia companies.
Now, that must have been a huge signifier. Status, loyalty, especially given their background, fleeing persecution by the state in France.
It was possibly one of the most visible signs of full integration and loyalty. Holding a militia commission conferred real local prestige. And remember those civic disabilities we talked about with the Church Act? Well, militia commissions were often directly tied to being in good standing with the Anglican establishment. So, serving as an officer wasn't just about defense, it was a public declaration.
A declaration of what?
That you were loyal to the British Crown, loyal to the colonial government, willing to uphold its authority and defend its interests. You'd shifted from being a subject seeking protection to being a citizen providing it. A huge symbolic step.
And then there are the marriage patterns. You touched on this earlier. Marrying outside the Huguenot community.
Yes, intermarriage. It's often the ultimate seal of social blending, isn't it? Weaving families together.
How common did that become for this generation?
Well, the first generation, Isaac and Suzanne's kids, some still married into established Huguenot families. We mentioned the Gary connection. There were others, like the Dutarc family, pronounced Dutarc.
Okay.
But increasingly, as the sons and daughters of Isaac I came of age, we see them marrying into established English families in the colony.
And this wasn't just about romance, presumably.
Probably not entirely, no. It was often a very pragmatic strategy on both sides, a way to merge assets, build alliances, solidify social standing. The DuBoses might bring newly acquired land and proven economic drive. The English families might bring older connections, establish social networks, maybe political influence. It benefited everyone involved.
When you put all these pieces together, the language shift, dealing with the Church Act, the land grab, the militia service, the marriages, it really is quite striking how fast it happened. We're basically talking about one generation making this massive transformation.
The speed is remarkable, but perhaps necessary for them to thrive. Isaac I, the immigrant, he laid the foundation. Survival, faith.
Right.
His sons, this bridge generation, they took that foundation and with what looks like real foresight and pragmatism, they engineered this complete pivot, sociologically, economically.
From what to what?
From being French-speaking refugees on the edge of society to being native-born, English-speaking planters, landowners, full participants in this growing, prosperous, though complicated British colony. They managed that transition. Children of refugees became founders of an American family line.
I think what's really interesting there is the sense that they weren't just passively assimilated. It sounds like they actively chose a path towards integration, towards power, even if it meant letting go of some of the cultural markers their parents held so dear.
I think that's a very fair assessment. That's the legacy, perhaps, of this bridge generation. They made choices that ensured their children, the third generation, might forget how to speak the French of their grandparents.
Right.
But they would inherit land. They'd inherit status. They'd inherit the right and the means to influence the future of the colony. In their eyes, maybe that was how they truly honored their parents' legacy of perseverance by securing a position so strong it couldn't easily be shaken.
So to wrap up this part of the story, this Carolina-born generation, Isaac's kids, they took that inheritance of faith and sheer grit from Isaac and Suzanne, and they used it to plant the family roots deep, really deep into American soil, not just as survivors, but as landowners, as influential citizens.
And that foundation, the economic power, the social standing they built, that's the absolute key for what comes next.
How so?
Because by securing their own position, they empowered the next generation, their own children, the grandchildren of Isaac the immigrant. They provided the wealth, the education, the reputation, the connections, everything necessary for that third generation of Duboses to step up and take on even bigger roles, riskier roles, roles that would involve fighting for a whole new idea, independence, the creation of a new nation.
So the planters enabled the patriots.
You could absolutely say that. Without the consolidation of wealth and status by the second generation, the third generation wouldn't have had the platform to become leaders in the revolution.
Well, that tees up our next deep dive perfectly. Join us then as we focus in on one of those children of the bridge generation, a grandson of Isaac, a patriot who fought for independence in the American Revolution, Captain Samuel Dubose.
And looking even further ahead, after tracing that historical line, we'll eventually jump forward, right into the present day, actually. We'll explore how modern science, things like DNA analysis, are starting to unlock some of the deepest secrets about where this family and perhaps others like them ultimately came from. Secrets maybe even they didn't know.
Always more to uncover.
Always.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep digging deeper.